Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the Making Tools for Games panel. We're here to talk about making tools for games. You can tweet us. Our Twitter handles are all up here, but we'll introduce all the people in a second. Why is that not changing? There we go. Okay, so we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the tools that we've made for games, as well as how and why we make tools for games and some good practices for making tools for games. We remembered this XKCD comic existed at the very last minute yesterday, so we added it, but we think it's appropriate to our presentation. We haven't really got many slides, we've just got some prompt questions, so we're going to try and have a bit of a conversation going while we sit up here. First, we should probably tell you who we are. So I'm going to start with John, and John's going to introduce himself, and then we're going to go into the line and get to another John eventually.
Starting with John was
John.
Like the most
starting with John. So hi, I'm Jon Manning. I am one half of Secret Lab. This is the other half of Secret Lab, and I'm also the creator of Yarn Spinner, which is a dialogue tool which was used in Night in the Woods. I've been mostly falling into a pattern of doing tools dev for my games just as a matter of habit. So I'll be talking a bit about stuff that I've worked on, both as like public projects as well as private internal tools that I'm sure every one of you has made. Just out of curiosity as well, just raise your hand if you consider yourself as a tools developer. Okay, and separately as someone who has made tools. More, right, okay. And I feel like that separation is an interesting one. Anyway.
Thank you, John.
So I'm Tim. Hi. I haven't been making tools for games as long as John or John. The Johns. But I have been making loads of tools, particularly for a lot of academics at university when I was a student. Most recently for game stuff, I have made the new version of the compiler, Lexer and Parser for Yarn Spinner specifically, but I've also been making a whole bunch of other little tiny things in my own spare time, both for my own games and for other people. Yeah. I should say who I am. I'm an independent game developer / app developer / poor person. So yeah, that's me.
Cool. I'm Jon Kane, and I usually go under the name of Gritfish. I've released a couple of games on Steam and iOS now, and I mostly work solo, but then with an artist and composer who come in later. And to sort of avoid burnout, I tend to make my own tools just to like reduce the amount of crap I have to do by hand. One of those came out of porting Killing Time at Lightspeed to mobile, which was like, it's an HTML compiler that just like, you put in an HTML file and spits out like an app for every possible version, just because all of the tools to do that were garbage and disconnected. And so I just daisy chained them all together and released that.
Awesome. And I'm Paris. I don't really make tools, but I yell at people who do make tools. So I figured I'd come here and do this. We're going to start with figuring out what we mean by tools. So I'd like to ask John Kane.
Yep.
Sorry, this is going to get really
this layout, yeah.
We've got Displays and Gritfish, if that helps.
I'm going to ask Gritfish what we mean by tools when we say tools. Do we mean a thing that is a program? Do we mean a thing that is a piece of paper? Do we mean a thing that we go and sign up for, like Trello? Or do we mean something we make?
I think the way I phrased it last night when we were trying to go through these slides was, it's a thing that does a thing. And it's
very helpful.
Yeah. But if it's, I mean, the reason I use tools is that it does a job that I don't want to do or that I don't have time to do. And it just it's anything I can do to just sort of offload some of the mental stress, like the workload of it.
Yep. So it's something that offloads a piece of the mental strain of doing something. Do you agree with that, Tim?
Yeah, I mean, I would, my definition of tools pretty broad. So Unity and Unreal are also technically tools, but generally when people say they're developing a tool for a game, they don't go, hey, I'm making a whole game engine or anything like that. They're generally thinking more something to solve a very single specific problem. So with HTML, I wanted a way to quickly create a version of my game for every platform sort of thing. So that's the tool, whereas the engine itself is, HTML in that case sort of thing. So that's how I see a tool, something to solve a single problem as opposed to the bigger sort of things like Unity and Unreal, which are also tools, but just too big to just be called that, in my opinion.
See, I don't know that I agree with that because, and I fear that I'm too broadly defining it, but I think that a tool is any part of your game that is not visible to the player. Because, and I think that slots in with yours as well, but by looking at tools as everything that a player can't see, it means you can start thinking about, okay, how much time am I allocating to the bits that the player cares about, and how much am I allocating to the bits that I, as a programmer or somebody interested in solving cool problems, care about. Because if you spend all your time going, oh, I made the most amazing custom inspector in my Unity objects, like, that's great. That's awesome. And if that improves your life as a developer, fantastic. And you can be an amazing tools developer, but did it actually help your game? Maybe, but hard to say. So
okay. I think that's a good start. So I'd like to ask another question now, in that I want to know if tools always improve something technical. So do you think a tool has to be something that makes a thing you can measure quantitatively better? So it makes something quicker, it makes something more efficient, or it optimizes something? Or could a tool be something that helps you stay sane as a programmer? Like, you kind of hinted that might be the case earlier, but I'd like to get your thoughts in detail on that. John.
This John I helped out on Night in the Woods, and one of the things that is in Night in the Woods is in the town sections there are little squirrels running around. So they're jumping on power lines and they're running around, and they don't do anything to gameplay. They're just background elements. Now, the main programmer in Night in the Woods, Alec Holoka, one of the very first things that he did after he got the whole town layout done was he worked on an extremely elaborate AI system for the squirrels called SquirrelNet, with custom UI for showing the paths taken by the squirrels, where they could jump, how they could jump, and showing like dotted lines between points. No one really cares about how complicated the squirrel system was, but it made the whole thing so much nicer to be around, because once you've got that foundation of just this frosting on top of your cake, it just makes it enjoyable to be in that development environment. So I don't think that it has to be a thing that measurably or quantitatively improves your game development experience, your game's play experience, rather. I think that if it's something that improves your life as a developer in production, especially if you're working in a very small team or even alone, then I think it's absolutely worth it. The trick is, of course, not getting stuck.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of on the same side there. Like with that XKCD chart, it shows like what point is it worth making a tool from a temporal metric. But I would say most tools, when I'm making them, are mostly because I want to make it, and it probably won't necessarily, depending on the tool, it may not save any real time from me just manually doing the thing. A lot of the time, a tool that I make for the project that it's intended for will actually only save like 15, 20 minutes, but it's a lot more fun to actually make that tool and then go, I have now made the tool. If I then use it again, I will save hundreds of hours, even though I know I'm never going to use it again.
But you could.
But I could, yeah. It's sort of a thing where like this doesn't take into account that like it's not necessarily how much time you're saving, but also you wanted to just get it out of your head as a thing, so that way it's like, as a programmer, I find I like to try and solve problems, even if it's not necessarily the correct problem of how do I make this better. But yeah.
I think sort of the one that is the least measurable is a level generator that I wrote for Malodrops, which on its own generates crap. Like it is just random crap on the screen, and like not necessarily playable crap, but it starts from a point of there being crap to move around, not a totally blank screen. So it's like that Mr. Squiggle thing. It's way easier to like finish a drawing than just to like stare at a blank page every time. And measurably, that probably made the game a little bit more clunky and a little bit more random and a little bit softer around the edges, which some people really don't like about that game. But it saved me from like having a breakdown of starting at a blank page like 100 times.
Yeah. So you're all programmers or kind of programmers. I'd like to know if a tool is always a program, or can artists build tools, or authors build tools, or completely non-technical game designers build tools? Can there be pieces of paper or something on a whiteboard or something you can make with like a craft set?
The closest thing that I can think of is Crow Team, when they're working on the Talos Principle, they prototyped all their levels in Lego. There's a video of it somewhere of just the team showing just footage of them playing around with their Lego sets, rolling wheels around representing the patrolling robots. But I mean, lo-fi prototyping has been around forever, and I think if you want to call that a tool, then absolutely, yeah. I don't think that they have to be a program. I think that anything that acts as grease for your wheel is going to be enough.
Yeah, I would say like this is not game related, although more people should use Excel in game development. Excel is like actually the most amazing meta tool out there. Like spreadsheets as a programmer, I hate Excel. I think it's a terrible waste of space and time and should be burnt. But from everyone who's not a programmer, Excel is immediately understandable, and they can make their own like crude data entry stuff that then I, as the programmer, can scrape and then put into the actual project itself. So like I wouldn't say what they've made is a program there. It is just they've made their own data entry tool there by defining their own columns and their own structure, and then I massage it further.
Just to jump on top of that. So the team working on Deus Ex Human Revolution actually used Excel as part of their prototyping because the very first version of the hacking minigame was done in Excel. Like it was a playable game done with macros in Excel. And the exact same thing is true for their conversation system because the conversations in Deus Ex Human Revolution are rock, paper, scissors. Someone says a thing and you can say either a neutral thing, the thing that will progress you in the conversation, or the thing that will take you back. So that's how the conversation minigame works. And they implement the whole thing in Excel. And it worked just fine because you can, like, the data tables are already part of the program, so it worked totally fine. So yeah, absolutely, you can use like you don't have to be writing scripts or even macros. You can just say,
just
here's my
columns,
sheet.
yeah.
John?
I think you've kind of covered it. Like I've done paper prototyping for lots of things. I've specific tools probably not so much, just like trying to figure out on paper whether or not an idea will work. And yeah.
Okay, so tools are the grease. We've established that. I'd like to know what the longest you've done something the hard way, and I'll get to the hard way in a second, was before you've made a tool to support it. And I would also like to know secondarily if the hard way is the right way of putting that, because when I showed these questions to a few people, they were like, the hard way? It's just a different way. I just like making tools. They'll leave me alone. So yeah, John?
Yeah.
Kane?
I've released on Steam, Google Play, iOS, Humble, and itch.io. And between those things, you probably have to make about 80 different sizes of all of your storefront imagery. And I hated that experience so much. And I went through that twice before I wrote a script that does it in under 30 seconds. And it just like compiles all the bits into just every possible size imaginable. And it's like you don't have pixel perfect control over that system, but my God, it's so much faster. And so, yeah, that end to end is probably like a year of doing things like every time I needed a new thing, I had to find all my Photoshop files, put a new thing together, save it, and upload it. Whereas now I just like I hit a button and
then it's done.
And it's done, and I'll never do it again. So, yeah.
For me, this wasn't for a game. This was for a game companion. Does anyone here know the game Twilight Imperium? It's a massive ball game. It's actually a terrible game, but I love it. It has a lot of text, and I wanted my companion app to have every little bit of text in it. So I actually hand transcribed every bit of text, and that's taken me about 80 hours, I would say, if I was to estimate. So I actually started writing like an OCR thing to do it. I still haven't used that because I couldn't get the accuracy high enough because it has a lot of like made up alien words. But if I was to start again, I would definitely do that. But I think that's probably the one I've spent the most time on doing it the manual way before. I still haven't technically given up on it, but I'm going to give up on it because there's just too much text and the new version of the game just came out. So, yeah.
I was working on a game for kids. It was for the Australian Broadcasting Corporation's Play School series. And one of the things in that game is a puzzle. So you touch an object and it explodes into lots of little parts and you've got to reassemble it. And so that means that we got our original image. So we received it as a Photoshop file. Each of the parts was a separate layer and it was pre-composited. So what we had to do was take the images, take the layers, trim them, remember where they were offset to the original origin point, and then do that. And repeat that for about 24 separate puzzles. And I began by exporting the layers, trimming them, and then like measuring by hand where they were, and like either like usually on my screen, but at one point I did get a ruler out, and that was one of the most chill experiences of my life. Just open the next one, measure, write it down, measure, write, and I felt the best that I had in that entire project for a long time. Then I was reminded by my producer that the deadline was coming up and could we please get a move on? And so I went final round tool. So it depends on what you mean by the hard way. Do you mean the hard way meaning the tedious way, the bit that you don't like, or just the long way? Because the long way can be okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's what I'd like to know, whether the hard way is the right way of putting that, because I don't often think something being more tedious is necessarily a bad thing. It's just if you're trying to save time, you might need a tool to do that. But in this case, obviously, you were happy to do it the chill Zen way for a little while
very
before
happy,
moving
wasn't
to
I?
actually making a tool. For weeks.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so on the same line, when do you stop doing something by hand? Is it when it becomes a time pressure, or is it when you get sick of doing it the chill Zen way, or is it some other combination of factors? Is it...
Often, so that was an exception. Usually I have to fight to not write a tool because I am, like any programmer, extremely bad at my estimates. How long will it take to make this tool? Oh, half an hour. And then, yeah, of course. So I have to actually push myself to do it by hand because my assumption is always going to be, if I write a tool, it'll actually take less time, and that's often wrong. So I stopped doing it by hand once I've convinced myself that I've correctly estimated it. Of course, the other cases are when it's a proc gen thing, so there's no way that I could do it all by hand, or that there's no way for it to be computationally done by a person. So just the amount of maths involved. I try to defer to the human side of me as much as I can.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that with one sort of additional thing. If it's to be used by someone who's not me, I try and make a tool for it. Because 9 times out of 10, it's easy to teach someone a tool that you've created as the interface to your system or whatever system you're trying to work with, as opposed to trying to teach them how to use the system. That's not like a artist can't program or anything, the joke or whatever. It's actually just 9 times out of 10, it is going to be easier to go, look, here is a cut down thing you can use that then I have handled the interaction so you don't have to worry about it. Because I think the ultimate job of a programmer is to no longer be necessary on a project, which is kind of weird, but that's sort of where I should definitely write a tool because it has to be used by person X who is not me. So yeah, I think that's my line there.
Yeah.
I think mine would be the point at which I've made tools has been when I understand it to the point where I don't have to think about how to do it anymore. And it is just like, okay, well, I just have to do this 80 times now. Well, that is when I stop thinking about how to actually do the thing and how to make a thing to do it. Because my brain is no longer engaged in that task. So it becomes engaged about how I would automate it.
How you'd solve that,
So it's at the point at which the problem is no longer interesting.
Yeah. The problem is not how to do it. The problem is how to do it efficiently.
Yeah.
I can also add to Tim's comment about giving it to another person. Night in the Woods, much of the writing was done by Scott Benson, who was also the artist. So the way that the game works, of course, is lots and lots of narrative choices, lots and lots of logic happening around those choices. And there was no time for Scott to learn to be as proficient a coder as the project needed him to be. So Yarn Spinner and the Yarn language exists because we needed a way to say, okay, you're writing this dialogue, often by hand. Let's give you a way to just transcribe just the dialogue and make it so that you can do just the logic that you need, and then the game development stuff happening around that can happen around you. Because that meant that just freed him up so much and allowed the game to be produced. Wouldn't have been possible otherwise.
So along the same lines, I'd like to know what makes a good tool or a tool good. And I think you've kind of answered that so far, in that it might be when a programmer or programming, if you are the programmer, is no longer necessary to make it work. Do you think that's a fair answer, Jon Manning?
I think so. I also think that the quality of a tool is... You can measure it in time saved. You can measure it in terms of overall team happiness. As you have probably guessed, my preferred metric is team happiness because, we all have unlimited time to make our games. No, we don't. I think that the quality of a tool depends on how much its recipient likes it. And if you're working in a large team, then you tend to assume that what you're working on will not be used by you, it will be used by whoever needs it. So at that point, UX becomes one of the most important factors. Like the user experience of your tool, how much of a headache is it solving versus how much of any software that you write as part of a workflow process will introduce its own problems and headaches. So a tool is good if it introduces less headaches than it solves, I think.
I would say a tool is good when the person who's using it stops complaining about it. Which either means they've either adapted to it and it was great at first,
but Unity is a great tool and everyone complains about it all the time.
That's the thing. See, like that's what I'm saying. Unity is too big to be called a tool. Like the individual parts in Unity are like the what's a really good
Like the sprite dicer.
Yeah, like the sprite atlasing stuff. They're great. I love that in Unity, but Unity itself I have heaps of complaints with. So that sort of thing. So like when you make a small tool and people generally are complaining less about it than they were before is generally when I think it's a good tool. And that doesn't necessarily mean it is a good tool. It means it's good enough for the job at hand. I'm a real big believer in, what is it, a good plan today is better than a perfect plan tomorrow sort of thing.
Fair.
So yeah.
My favorite like definition of what is a good tool came out of was when there were a lot of people arguing about Steam opening up and you could just put crap on it. You could put whatever you liked on there and it was trash and it was ruining it. But that also means that it's a good tool, because if someone who is just absolute entry level can make horrifying garbage with it, then it means that it's accessible, it means it's usable. And that's why Twine is an amazing tool, because people who can't program just make amazing, wonderful garbage with it right off the bat.
So you can assess the value of a tool by determining if people can make crap with it?
Yes.
Okay.
No, I'd agree with that.
Absolutely, yeah. RPG Maker, incredible tool. Reams of crap. But also gems, because of just the volume effect. It scales out.
Yeah, Twine is my favorite one. Like I've written so many terrible Twine games. But then you'll also play ones that you're just like, wow, this is actually amazing. Like I love that someone who would otherwise not be able to do this could make this thing for me. Like that's mind-blowing that something that simple exists.
That's good. So I'm going to ask a more personal question, which is, what's the first thing you remember making a tool for? I'm going to start with Tim this time.
We were talking about this yesterday, and I couldn't think of an answer, but I thought about it. And I'm going to probably say the first thing I remember making a tool for was Fallout 2. Had really limited save slots because back then. So I actually I was thinking, it's like, what did I make? And I made a save scumming thing. It would basically just like every 15 minutes move the save files into a new folder and then rename them. So that way, because I loved Fallout 1 and Fallout 2 and I wanted to do everything, but to do everything means you'd have to play it like several hundred times, which I did do anyway. But I wanted to effectively be able to like roll back time. But if you've only got 8 save slots, you can only do that 8 times. So I made a thing which would just literally, it was just a copy and paste tool from the folder into another folder. So that way I could then put them back myself manually when I wanted to go back, which was, it was terrible because there was no way to know where I was in the game until I then loaded it back up. But I think that's probably the first tool I made that I remember.
Did a similar thing with FTL so I could cheat.
Oh, yeah.
What about you, John?
Yeah. Mine was a PHP script to just like be an intermediary between all the Flash games I was making and MySQL databases. And like it started as just like how do I get database stuff into my Flash games, and then it like as I moved into being more of a web programmer and less of a games programmer for a while, that then became like the backbone of every website that I built. And it was just like, oh, there's one PHP file that means I never really have to write a database query ever, because I just say give me this and it does it. And it came out of being like just lazy and not really it was like I don't have time to learn like databases as well as I need to, so I will just write a thing that kind of works, and it did it. And like 2 years later I had to update every website that I'd ever made because I realized how insecure that was. And you could just like do horrifying stuff, and the fact that no one ever did was a godsend. But so sometimes you can use a tool too much.
What about you, John?
Has anyone here played a game called Dink Smallwood?
Oh my gosh.
All right. Okay.
I thought we weren't going to talk about Dink Smallwood.
No, we have to. So Dink Smallwood was a Zelda-like RPG game released in 1999, and it just so happened that it had tremendous mod support, entirely by accident. And so this community popped up of people making little RPGs. And the scripting language that you used in it was this. I've never seen a worse compiler. I'll just leave it at that. Like, the compiler was extremely bad. And also at the time I was very young. I didn't really know how programming really worked. I learned how to program games using this shitty language. And it turned out that one of the very first tools that I ever made for it was a tool that would count the number of curly braces in my scripts, opening and closing, because I didn't understand what a syntax error was, and neither did the compiler. But I did know that if you didn't open and close it at the right balance level, then you have errors, which would be reported silently. I wrote tools that would basically check my code for me in ways I didn't understand it was doing, and that's how I got into language development, and that's how I wrote my dialogue system. So tools dev got me into games.
That's lovely. On a similar note, how do you make sure a tool is accessible to new people? So I think a tool that is a programming language that doesn't really do any checking of how it's compiling is probably not very accessible, because people who don't know the language yet are going to get confused and have to build tools like that.
Can I jump on that, actually?
You can.
So, while this particular tool, which is built into one particular game, was not very friendly, it was not very accessible, especially given that the community were people who did not know how to program at all and were first learning how to interact with computers beyond clicking and like on a consumer level, this shared suffering of bad tools created this amazing community of like, hey, if you make this typo in this function name, it works better. And it actually takes less time. So, okay, that wasn't your question, but I just wanted to, yes.
So I would like to know how you make something accessible to new people, and I think that's a way of not really doing that. So maybe Tim can start us off with a sensible answer.
So something I'm a firm believer in, although I'm not particularly good at myself, do as I say, not do as I do, is documentation. There's actually talk later today, I believe, about making sure your game is properly documented. And that's probably more true, I would say, for your tools, because the tools are how you're going to be building your game. So if you haven't written decent documentation, even if your tool is a bit dodgy, because every tool is a bit dodgy, if the dodginess is described somewhere that someone can then see and then be explained and understood, then I think it's accessible. And then there's also just the usual, make sure the UX makes sense and stuff. But yeah. I think of things that aren't immediately obvious, even writing just a simple README is really important.
What about you, John?
So the tools that I've been making and releasing this year have all been based in Node.js and Grunt, which is a task runner. All of that stuff is kind of second nature to me now as a web dev, because they're all web development tools, really. Getting into that, I had no idea how to just get, Node.js and run npm blah, where do I run that? And a lot of people aren't familiar with just running stuff from terminal or a command line, or don't even know how to find that. And all of that stuff was just understood because it was all the documentation was written by programmers who were familiar with all of that ecosystem. And so entering that ecosystem was the worst experience. So when I released HTML, Window Dresser, and Vocoder, which are the three tools I've released, I made just things that you could click on in Windows Explorer that would install Node.js and would install the package manager and would install these were things that everyone in my industry knows to just type in terminal. But if you didn't know, okay, you need to open up terminal, but if you need Ruby, you need to open it up in this other way, or all these other things. If you just double click a button instead to do it, that took me 5 extra minutes and probably saves having to explain an entire software ecosystem to someone. You can document, or you can just make a thing so you never need to document it because it just runs. Yeah.
So most tools that we've been talking about have been ones that simplify or reduce the time taken to perform a set of repetitive tasks, sometimes with parameters. And I found that the best tools that follow this pattern are ones that are really, really verbose about what they're going to do and what they are doing and what they have done. Because when that means that, one, you can understand why they're doing what's being done, what missing steps you didn't realize were needed, and additionally, if they break, you can understand what th're trying to do, and you can go in and do it yourself in ways that patch it up. A fantastic example of this is not in games development, but is more general iOS application development. There's a toolchain called Fastlane. Has anyone here heard of Fastlane? So some nods. So Fastlane is an automation set of scripts that take care of stuff for you. So rather than manually building your app, zipping it up, uploading it to the App Store, checking it, you can basically type Fastlane beta, and it will build it, deploy it, and then notify all your beta testers all at once. And then it'll tell you at the very end, I just saved you 10 minutes. And as it's doing that, it tells you what it's doing, what it's trying to do, where the information is coming from. It shows emoji to show just the overall tone of what's going on. Like if things are going well, then it's little party hats. But if it's not, then we get little sad things. When it says setting to the App Store, it shows a little rocket. Flavor and elaboration, I think, are some of the most important things. If you're building tools in Unity, make use of the info box. Sorry, I think it's called the help box widget in your inspector, because that's the thing that shows a little bit of extra text saying, I'm going to do this when you click on this button. If you've written a tool, you know what the tool does. Your user does not, or only knows what you've told them about it. If your program is explaining, I exist to do this thing, and here's what I'm going to do, that just makes life so much easier for your end user. So be verbose, be explanatory, talk too much like I'm doing right now.
So I suspect the answer to this question, which is how to get people using your tool, might be document it quite well or make it self-explanatory and then shout about it on Twitter. But I'd like to hear you guys say that. So
Yeah.
could we confirm that that's how we get people using your tool, or is there other little secrets? Jon, Kane, maybe?
I think, the more popular of my tools is HTMLE, which is the compiler thing. And all the attention that I got from that was yelling about it on Twitter, saying like, okay, so like if you can use Twine, you can do this. And you can actually like, don't say, I wrote a thing that takes an HTML and JavaScript application and then say what the outcome is and like yell about that outcome.
Yeah.
It's like you can put Twine on a phone and Steam and not ever touch code.
Yeah, you press a button and ta-da, it's done.
Yeah, and like that's how to talk about it and get people excited about it, rather than I made a thing that daisy chains grunt tasks together. Like that's the boring interpretation of it.
I would just say one thing that is important is make sure you license your tool correctly. If your tool is free and you want people to fiddle around with it, put a proper open source license on it.
Yep.
If your tool is paid for, make sure there's like an agreement on how they're allowed to use it. Because like most independent developers won't necessarily care, but I know from like some experiences I've had, not with games tools, but with just open source stuff, if you don't license it properly, companies who do actually care about this stuff, which in theory everyone does, will complain because they want to use something but they legally can't.
If I can interject here, game developers are really bad at licensing.
Yeah.
Like really bad. They just put things on GitHub randomly with no license and
Use it for whatever.
Use it for whatever. That's not a license. You're not covered legally in any sense. You need to be really careful and look into it and do it properly if you're going to use other people's code or give other people your code. So I looked it up and learned about it. Even big game development companies are bad at it. Like Unity, half their stuff on GitHub is not licensed correctly. It's just randomly there.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure both Unity and Unreal are breaking their own terms and services.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% certain, but I'm pretty sure they are.
Yeah.
So look into licensing for when you're sharing stuff and getting people to use your tool. Jon, do you have any?
I do. So the exact same marketing techniques and resources that you use to promote your game can and should be used for promoting your tools as well. So Jon already talked about that for HTMLE and for vocode and everything there, and we did the same thing with Yarn Spinner. So there was no pre-planned marketing strategy for this tool, but all I was doing was, as I was working on it, I would take screenshots of the most recent script that it could run. Turns out people are actually okay with screenshots of text. It's not very accessible, but it's a language, so I can't really show a cool GIF of an explosion. So making use of the existing channels that you have can be used to both build those channels to extend to a wider audience of fellow developers, and also to go, hey, cool, check out this thing, it's really good. Maybe I can get some help with it by people setting in their own code. That's what open source is all about.
Steam Spy is a really good example of that. Like Steam Spy just tweets graphs, and you're like, well, look at that. I can see where PlayerUnknown's took over CS:GO. Like I don't know what that means from an actual business perspective, other than PlayerUnknown has tons of money now. But like you can see it and you go, that's cool. It's just a picture on Twitter, you know.
Also, before we move on, like actually, all my things are just like dumb command line stuff, but like make it look nice.
Yeah.
I think actually helps because in the same way that I wrote the batch scripts that you can just double click on, if you go to the effort of like making a nice logo and having a nice design page and it looks friendly, then like you're probably going to get more people adopting it because it looks like it. There's an implicit layer of trust there when it looks like a professional tool, rather than here is the thing on GitHub that may or may not work.
Yeah. Well, and Asset Forge by Kenny, who's the producer of all its free assets.
Oh yeah.
He did an amazing job of promoting it, and all it was here's a GIF of the most recent model that I made in my tool, and made a really nice logo for it, put it up on itch. Like it's it's polished.
Kenny is a master of branding.
Yeah.
So I'd like to ask a couple of quick questions before we wrap up, and hope we have time to take a question or two. Do you think tools that you build for your own purposes, when you're just noodling around making something random, are different from when you build a tool for a larger project where you might be in a team for professional purposes or as a student? So maybe start with John.
I find that question interesting because my professional projects began as personal ones. I started scratching my own itch, and that turned into me working on like the full actual game. So really, it's being aware of your audience and your expected user base. Originally, it was, okay, cool, let's see if I can make a language. And that turned into, okay, now I'm actually supporting the localization efforts so they can be used to be presented at an Italian game festival. Like, being aware of the change in responsibility really shifts your perspective. I don't think that it's changed the way that I work on my tool, but it has changed the way that I anticipate, if I add this feature, what's that going to mean for me later on? If I add in this thing, is somebody going to rely on it later on as part of their workflow? It turns out a lot of people relied on a buggy version of a feature in Yarn Spinner, and now I can't change that very easily without introducing a breaking change or having to rethink the whole thing. So yeah, just be aware that your code has consequences.
Tim?
I would say they're completely different. 9 times out of 10, when a tool is intended only for me, I will do it the quick and, well, I'll always do it the quick and dirty way because I'm a programmer. But I'll do it the way that doesn't have to last longer than the project itself, which means it may require like a conglomeration of terrible scripts and hacks. Like I was at a game jam recently and I was doing the data munging side of it. So we were scraping, it was GovHack Australia. I was scraping the data from the government websites and then munging it together into a form that the game could then use. And those scripts actually took about 20 minutes to run because I wrote them the super crude, quick way. And that was perfectly fine for this because I only need to run once. So it didn't actually matter. But you would never in a million years release that because it's terrible. And people would hate you for it. And if you were doing it with bigger data, it would actually probably crash your computer because of all the memory it was using. Basically, the biggest difference is when it's for not you, when it's a not you project, someone else will have to decide if it's done. So because of that, you have to keep it in your mind, like John said, that what you're doing will impact how they view it. So it's important to remember that it's not for you is the main thing because you do things your way.
I think possibly when I do tools for work, I'm more strict on how I make the tool and less strict on how I document it because it's going to be used by programmers who can just ask me.
Yep.
Generally, and like that documentation will build up over time of just like whenever someone asks me a question, I write down the answer after I give it to them because then it's like, okay, well, here's a list of all of the questions people have had. Your answer is probably there. Whereas if I'm making it like for myself and then releasing it, I will actually, I documented HTML really, really, really carefully and made sure that people with no programming experience could follow that because like I was just releasing it into the unknown and I didn't know who would be using it. So yeah, it's making tools for programmers whose skills I know versus people who I've never met.
Yeah.
So Tim, have you ever abandoned a tool and then gone back to doing it the way you did it before the tool?
Yeah, all the time.
Why?
Generally because, like, going back that XKCD chart, there is a point where it turns out making the tool will actually cost more time than doing the project. So, I mean, there's lots of different examples of that. Probably one that I keep going back to and I'll never be finished with is I'm trying to make a Twine auto layout tool, and I keep like getting it half done and then throwing it away, and then
Is this the one I started you on with?
Yeah, this is the one you started me on, and like
God.
something I work on like every week, and I'm like, I know, I'll work a bit more on this and then throw it away, and when I'm making a Twine game, I just manually lay out all the nodes again. So yeah.
What about John?
Probably sort of. I used to do a lot more PHP and a lot more backend like web development, and now I just use CMSs for everything. Like, why would I ever go through all of the pain of like the tools that I was making have now been superseded by tools that I don't have to maintain. So why would I like continue making a thing that is like why would I keep like maintaining my skateboard when I have a car? It's kind of like I just have a free thing that's better, so I should actually use that rather than.
I used to be convinced that I should be doing all my basic models in ProcGen, so generate, my things and lay out the things, and I realized, or I could just use Blender. But I also began working on a JavaScript integration bridge for Objective-C for games. The idea is you could script your programs really well, and I was going to make this whole thing. I had a branding idea for it. It was going to be fantastic, and then I realized there's no reason for this at all. Objective-C is fine, Swift is fine, and I'm going to be using Unity in the future anyway. So the whole thing just became a bit of a wash. But I did have a lot of fun, so maybe I did succeed. I don't know.
I just remembered another one. Mallowdrops used originally, like the first version of that I built, I wrote like a file format for that game.
Haven't we all been there?
Yeah.
It'll be so much more efficient this way.
Well, it was just like I didn't know that tiled existed, and then like I found tiled and like, oh shit, I could like the GUI is here. I should just do this instead. And so the way that game now works is that all of the files are tiled files, and then it converts it into the old format and runs it.
So on that note,
yeah.
We've got 3 minutes left. If anyone has any questions, I think we have a microphone here.
Yeah, it's Mike here.
Which can
Someone want to?
someone has a question?
If someone has a
they
question,
can come and get the
grab the
microphone.
mic.
Come grab the
We
mic.
just need you to use the mic so it gets
Yep.
picked up with the recording.
Yeah.
We think it's on.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Oh.
Is it on?
Yes.
Oh, there we go.
Hey.
There we go. What are your go-to tools, languages, frameworks for making tools?
Python.
Yeah, I was
100%
gonna,
Python.
There is no language in which you can make something awful as quickly as you can with Python.
I would say Python, but with the addition of I consider myself a terrible programmer, but I understand glue. So like my current version of that Twine tool actually uses Beautiful Soup from Python to scrape it and then converts it into like a Swift program because I was on a Swift high at the time, which then gets passed into GraphViz, which I have installed on my computer, which then spits back out a Twine file. So I mean like just glue things together. Someone's already done the work for you. Just use whatever you are quick with. But Python is always a good go-to.
I
Yeah,
keep sorry.
oh.
So I have existing tooling that I've written in Python. I think I really should make this into a proper thing. I'll port to C#, but then I realize there's no way I can make anything quite as good in C# in the speed I did with Python. So yeah.
Yeah. So the tool set that I use for all of my tools and most of my day job work is Node.js, which runs JavaScript on your machine like it's native program code. So everything is just JavaScript. And if you think you can do horrible stuff in Python, you have not seen JavaScript because JavaScript can do some monstrous things. And combining that with a task runner like Grunt or Gulp is the other one. So you can basically just like a Grunt task is it just does one thing, and then you have whole chains of things just like glued together. And so like that, and there's a thing called NPM, which is the Node Package Manager. So you can just like search for a task that does this one thing, and then you can take the output of that and put it into another thing. And you just like it's like having all of that glue done for you. And occasionally you write like one piece of it to manage just like one step in the weird glued together monster you've created. And that seems to be all of modern web design and web development is gross glued together monsters.
Look at any package manager for any toolchain ever. 9 times out of 10, someone has either solved your problem or has solved most of your problem, and then you can then fix the rest. Like if you try and reinvent the wheel, you'll end up complaining that your wheel sucks because like it's hard to make a wheel. Whereas it's really easy to import wheel and then just use their wheel.
So with that bombshell, that's our entire time.
Oh.
So thank you for coming. If you have any questions, just grab us or tweet us or whatever. But
We're around all day.
thank you,
tomorrow.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.